The last subrace of the Atlantean race had already been assimilated into an early subrace of the Aryan stock, which had gradually spread over Europe as the lands emerged from the sea. When the time came for significant geological changes on Earth, a catastrophe wiped out much of Atlantis, along with many of its inhabitants who were known for their sorcery. However, some large islands like Ruta and Daitya survived. The more enlightened and spiritual Atlanteans had already migrated to the highlands of Asia, becoming the ancestors of the Turanians, Mongols, Chinese, and other ancient civilizations. According to Plato, the priests of Sais told Solon about a magnificent race that once inhabited the land of Greece, from which the Greeks descended. This race had tamed a mighty force from the Atlantic, which spread its power across Europe and Asia. The Greeks were but a diminished remnant of that once glorious civilization. The Secret Doctrine teaches that the seventh subrace of the Atlanteans, which had mingled with the early Aryan subraces, migrated from Asia to settle in the newly emerging lands of Europe. These settlers, originating from high plateaus, spread across the continent and gave rise to various nations, including the Egyptians, Phoenicians, Greeks, and Northern European peoples. In Greek mythology, the Cyclopes, depicted as one-eyed giants, were, according to Herodotus, miners and great builders. They were linked to the biblical giants known as Zamzummim or Anakim. Over time, other offshoots of the Atlantean race began to invade new lands, leading to wars and migrations. Many of these defeated tribes fled to distant regions, some of which eventually became islands due to further geological upheavals. Isolated from the mainland, these people gradually regressed into a more primitive state. The Trojan War, remembered in myth, represents a historical event that occurred around 8,000 years ago. Although mainstream historians date it to less than 1000 BCE, occult sources place it much earlier, closer to 6,000 years BCE. According to occult records, there is no distinction between the Atlantean ancestors of the ancient Greeks and Romans. The records show that the Latini of classical legend who entered Italy from the north were part of the same ancient migration as the Greeks. Although profane history views the Latins as preserving their nationality longer than the Greeks, they too eventually lost it. The occultist, guided by ethereal distinctions, can trace the origins of peoples and tribes more reliably than conventional historians. Occultism suggests that while Greeks and Romans were small subraces of the Caucasian lineage, they were also remnants of the Atlanteans. The Aeolians, Dorians, and Ionians were descendants of the Atlantean ancestors. Over time, the modern Greeks and Romans became part of the fifth race, having lost their Atlantean blood. The Egyptians, much older than the Greeks, had zodiacs that dated back to the time of the Atlanteans. According to esoteric teachings, the Egyptian zodiac is at least 75,000 years old, while the Greek zodiac is around 17,000 years old. The Egyptians, though no longer possessing Atlantean blood, retained the wisdom and knowledge of that ancient civilization, as evidenced by the records shared with Solon.